The incredible evolution of F1 lap times. Formula One is a sport that has evolved a lot since it has been officially introduced in 1950 as an official competition. With multiple engine manufacturers and multiple constructors, it was only right for the sport to go in the right direction. However, although the sport was moving in different directions on multiple occasions, they weren't always favouring the speed of the cars. Nevertheless, the cars now are much more sophisticated and much faster than in the first beginnings of the sport, which is why in this video we are going through the evolution of the F1 lap times. Stick around to see how the sport evolved and how the cars became what they are now. First, it's worth noting that the F1 Caravan wasn't always racing on the same circuit. For example, Spa in Belgium has endured lots of changes, with it being shortened to more than half of its original size. Therefore, it's pointless to compare times from the original and the modern circuit. This is why we are going to focus on lap times that were made in actual circuits with little to no changes, and we are going to express the difference in percentages. For example, if the time in Spa was 4:34.1 in 1950 in the first outing there, and the next year the fastest lap became 4:22.0, this comes to a difference of 4.51%. When you put it like this, it's not adding to a value, but when you compare all of the times and then add it from all the tracks on the calendar, it truly shows how big the difference is between the years compared. With the tracks that endured changes throughout the seasons, we are kind of in a bad situation when it comes to comparing the relative times. However, we found a solution to that, as we are going to use the track times for Monaco and Monza, since they are the tracks that are basically never changed throughout the time, and we can use the times here as a baseline to compare the times between the two seasons. None of this would make sense if we don't talk about the regulations and how that affected the lap times over time. True, there are various tactics that can be applied to make the better lap time on the track, like pitting for fresh new tyres in order to secure the fastest laps, or mounting a new engine prior to the race and then maxing it out in the race event. However, this is the closest we can get in comparison to lap times over the evolution of F1. The first rules that were implemented in F1 were known as Formula One regulations, and they were implemented in 1950 and 1951, while in the next two seasons the championship was run under Formula 2 regulations to increase participation. In the next few years, the cars were running with the engines mounted in front, only to change them to the mid-engine concept in the following years. This made a massive difference in the lap times because it improved the cornering ability by reducing some of the massive understeers the 1950s cars had. At this time, the issue was mostly with the tyres, with the engine choice being as liberated as possible. Tyres were very hard and skinny, so having a car that could corner as perfectly as possible was a challenge to overcome. At this time, Lotus was one of the most innovative manufacturers, with them producing lighter aluminium monocoque cars rather than having much heavier designs. From the 1950s to the 1960s, cars started to improve in lap time by between 5 and 10 seconds per season. This is mostly due to the regulations that were boosting the speed of the cars all the way until the beginning of the 1960s, when the regulations that were brought made the cars slower. Now the roll bar, belts and helmets were introduced, and the addition of fireproof fuel tanks and the ban of compressors, along with the change from 2.5-litre to 1.5-litre engines, all brought longer lap times and cars being much heavier and slower. But this speed reduction lasted for just 1 to 2 years, as in 1966 the regulations were opened again and the engines were made double the volume, from 1.5-litre to 3-litre, after sports cars were essentially quicker than Formula One at this time. In between the 1960s and 1970s, the engineers were really having a field day with the Formula One cars, as they were maximizing the handling to gain time in the corners, which essentially brought to huge improvements in the lap times. All of this time, the mid-engine era was present, and it ended in 1977. Now, the aero era started, with F1 cars seeing aerodynamic wings being mounted at their backs. Thanks to these aerodynamic wings, the acceleration and the speed were inevitable, and yet again F1 cars became quicker and quicker over time. In this amount of time, more precisely in the 1970s, cars became wider, and with the new incorporation of aero regulations, the cars became more and more powerful. However, 1976 happened, and Niki Lauda's accident has shown that the sport isn't as safe as someone would think. Safety structures were added to the cars around the pedal box, and aero boxes were removed to limit the horsepower. However, in 1978, Lotus introduced the ground effect rule, which was a massive improvement and turning point in Formula One. This has enhanced the lap times even further, but because the floor was acting as a wing and it wasn't as predictable as a wing, crashes with high speeds were often inevitable. The FIA has reacted in 1981, banning the flexible skirts with adding the ride height restrictions in a try to restrict the downforce generated from the floor of the car. In the 1990s, safety became the primary concern in the sport, which is why the FIA was constantly adding something to limit the speeds of cars. However, the teams managed to find more speed by adding more power to their engines, with the main way of doing this being the addition of massive turbochargers. At times, the power of the F1 car has reached 1400 HP, and the lap time difference was bigger and bigger over the years. In 1987, the FIA mandated a 4-bar boost limit after its initial try of hot fuel didn't work out, since the teams found a way to cool the fuel down and to cramp more in the engine and in the tank, therefore making the cars faster. In 1988, the pressure limit fell to 2.5 bar, before banning turbos all over in 1989. This meant that the cars were now running on naturally aspirated ways, with speeds being a bit knocked back in 1992 when the FIA narrowed the front wings. At this time, electronics and technology became a huge part of F1, which is why the cars were becoming faster and faster, and the war between McLaren and Williams was only enraging, no matter how hard the FIA was trying to make the safety concern the priority and the slowness of the cars to be imperative. The traction control, the ABS and the active suspension, along with the 3.5 litres and anything in between V8 and V12 cylinders, have all added to the enhancement of the speed of the F1 cars. In 1994, the F1 banned all of the safety systems in the sport, which saw the death of Ayrton Senna in a tragic accident in the Italian GP. The improvements were additionally made in 1995, with the limitation of the engines being to 3 litre and improving the safety cell. In the 2000s, we saw the mandatory use of V10s, which was the perfect middle ground between the V12 and the V8 engines. The cars were also narrower all the way until 2017, with them having a maximum width of 1.8 meters. In 2006, the V10s were swapped for V8s, 2.4-litre engines, as the budget cap has risen due to the massive influx of money from outside. This is the fastest that F1 cars were going, with them able to achieve more than 20,000 RPM. After this, there is a slight slope in rising when it comes to speed, as the limitations were made by the FIA, adding more and more to the safety of the cars, and therefore limiting the speed of the cars. As of now, the cars are equipped with 1.6-litre engines, and with the implementation of halo and roll hoops, the cars are much safer than they used to be. Accidents had to happen in order for this to be implemented, and that is the case with the halo implementation, as the 2014 death of Jules Bianchi has accelerated the process. The cars were always trying to use the aerodynamics in their favour, with them having even hundreds of bodies that are amplifying this aspect of the car. However, in 2009, the FIA banned all of them except the front and rear wings. Slick tyres were back to give more grip to the cars, but the wings were massively controlled by the FIA. As time passed by, the FIA had more and more impact on how the cars were being run on the track, and with the 2022 and 2026 regulations, we see that the manufacturers have less and less impact on how the car is going to behave on the track. Therefore, we came to the 2022 season, and although the cars are much quicker now, safety is on the top of the game, and F1 drivers haven't been safer at any other time. Let us know what you think of the evolution of lap times in the comments below.